Mr. President,
Senator from Kansas.
ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection, the quorum call is vitiated.
Mr. President, thank you for the recognition. I just returned from my home state, your home state, Kansas, to return to the work that we're about here in the United States Senate. This week, away from Washington, D.C., gave me the opportunity to travel really all corners of our state. I was from southeast Kansas in Galena to northwest Kansas in Goodland. And almost every night while I was home, weather was the topic of conversation. And certainly as Kansans who have experienced tornadoes in our own state over the last week, and certainly over the life of our state, we extend our deepest sympathies and concerns to the people of Oklahoma. It is weather that I wanted to talk about here on the Senate floor today, in preparation for an amendment that I will offer, or is being offered to the Farm Bill, and a continued discussion of that Farm Bill throughout this week. As I listen to Kansas farmers, the most prevalent request when it comes to farm policy, to a request for what ought to be in a Farm Bill, is the request by Kansans that crop insurance remain a solid and viable program. And we live in a state in which weather is not always our friend to agriculture, and yet agriculture is our most significant creator of economic activity, generator of jobs and economic growth in our state. And we have the pleasure of, in fact, we're very proud to feed, clothe, and provide energy to much of the world. At the moment, the challenges are great because of the significant effects that drought has had on Kansas and much of the Midwest. That drought has been ongoing for more than 2 years, and it has had a significant impact upon agricultural production. And it's that point I want to make as we debate a Farm Bill, the importance of crop insurance in response to those difficult times. Despite the drought, our nation remains the land of plenty, and Americans continue to enjoy the safest and most abundant food supply in the world. The reason we have so much is because of many factors. Prayers, the work ethic of American farmers and ranchers, the courage to persevere in spite of enormous challenges, and among those things, finally, is the ability to manage risk. Farming and ranching is a high-risk occupation. Producers can't manage the one thing that matters most to them, Mother Nature. Mother Nature is the one variable that can't be controlled. Mother Nature brings drought and rain and wind and hail, the things that a producer must face head-on each year to follow. With the inability to control the weather, we must control the things that we can, the great risks associated with agriculture. This is required if the United States is to remain that land of plenty. The risk management tool of choice is crop insurance. Crop insurance gives producers a safety net so that when there is a drought, a flood, a hailstorm, a windstorm, they can pick up the pieces and try again. This is what sets us apart from the rest of the world. We have the ability to manage our risks so that when Mother Nature gives us something bad, our nation's farmers and ranchers can live to start again. Crop insurance is a public-private partnership. The government helps the producers cover some of the costs of the policy, and the producer covers the rest. Consumers help the producer, and the producer helps the consumer. To be clear, producers pay a significant part of the premium out of their own pockets. In 2012, they paid $4.1 billion to buy insurance to manage their risks. When you take out a crop insurance policy, you get a bill, not a check. Crop insurance has virtually replaced the need for ad hoc disaster measures for crops. During my time in the House of Representatives and now in the Senate, going back to 1989, 42 such pieces of legislation have cost the taxpayer more than $70 billion. And during my time in the House and now the Senate, many times we've asked for ad hoc disaster assistance, a bill to pass the legislature to provide assistance at the moment. And crop insurance is the tool by which we can avoid those requests. When you manage risk with crop insurance, you save the taxpayer money and you give the producers a better program. Today, as we have scheduled votes, I have an amendment on the Senate floor dealing with a crop called alfalfa. Alfalfa is the nation's fourth most valuable crop, and it plays a significant role in our daily lives. Alfalfa is a building block for milk and meat. The hay that is grown in the fields of California, Idaho, South Dakota, Colorado, Oregon, Washington, Texas, Wisconsin, and Kansas, and the rest of the 50 states is a driver of the cost of product on the grocery store shelves. The nation's fourth most valuable crop is vitally important. The reality is producers are faced with risks, and there is no good way to manage them when it comes to this crop, alfalfa. The current crop insurance program, forage production, APH, is severely inadequate, as demonstrated by the fact that less than 10% of the acres are enrolled in the program, compared to corn, soybeans, and wheat, which are much more, around 80%. Producers are going back to the bank to borrow operating money and being told not to plant alfalfa because there is no good way to manage the risk. This is very troubling because of the impact that alfalfa has on the economy and our nation's food supply. The crop is important, and we need to figure out a way to manage its risks. Producers are being told to grow crops that have a safety net, crops that have some kind of guarantee when weather is bad. My amendment, number 987, requires the Federal Crop Insurance Corporation to conduct research and development regarding a policy to insure alfalfa and a report describing the result of that study. There is no additional cost to the taxpayer with my amendment. We need to take a good, hard look at alfalfa and recognize its value to the nation. We need to study and develop something that will work, save the taxpayer money, and make certain that the land of plenty remains the land of plenty. Alfalfa is a building block of milk and meat. With a risk management tool for alfalfa production, producers will enjoy lower input costs, and consumers will enjoy less expensive products on the grocery store shelves. Mr. President, I know you understand the value of agriculture in Kansas, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here on the Senate floor today to describe the value of crop insurance, and particularly to highlight the amendment that we will vote on later today. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Alaska.
Mr. President, I rise today to discuss the devastating spring breakup flooding affecting my home state in Alaska. And as you just heard from Kansas, weather patterns are affecting long-term droughts in the farmland, while in Alaska it is warm weather that's actually going the opposite direction. Over the last several weeks, our country has witnessed devastating tornadoes in Oklahoma. Our hearts go out to the families of Moore and Oklahoma City and many others that have been affected to rebuild their lives. Disasters like these remind us of the importance of family and community, and it should make us again examine the work being done by FEMA and other agencies to help communities prepare for natural disasters. While it didn't make national news, Alaska's families along the Yukon River are putting their lives back together after a record flooding last week. Thick river ice, high temperatures, and fast melting combined to flood the community of Galena during what we call breakup in Alaska. For those who have never witnessed it, breakup on Alaska's biggest and mightiest river is a spectacular almost beyond description. As the ice begins to move and buckle and crack, you can sometimes hear it from miles away. Trouble is the wrong conditions. The moving ice can get caught where the rivers make their bends. It piles up into mountains of jumbled ice, creating a natural dam that floods everything behind it. Or when it suddenly breaks loose, torrents of raging water and ice rush downstream. This year, breakup has unfortunately caused some extreme conditions in interior Alaska. Last week, quickly rising waters from a 30-mile ice jam along the Yukon River had the village of Galena underwater for 3 days. This is an example of what you can see. I mean, the woods, the trees are there, but all along there is water burying the buildings there. Galena is a village of fewer than 500 people located in interior Alaska. At least 300 of these residents had to be evacuated to keep them from danger. Others moved to buildings on higher ground to keep safe from the rising water. We're grateful to be able to say that no deaths or serious injuries have been reported. Real miracle when you look at the photos of the damage. As I said, this photo, the aerial photo of Galena, shows your extent of the damage. As mentioned, this was a severe flood. Came on very fast. I had to try to deal with this very quickly because the power of the Yukon when it's moving is fast and furious. These ice jams move fast. Once they break, worst flooding they've seen in 70 years. when in very remote communities like Galena don't have communication, river monitoring technology, transportation infrastructure to react quickly. And I have to say that, let me keep in mind, remind people that you cannot drive out of this community. You have to fly out of this community. So when the river is breaking, it is everybody's hands on deck. We're thankful for the response of the Tanana Chiefs Conference, safely evacuating many residents. The American Red Cross, Salvation Army, and many volunteers have provided invaluable help. They provide the community for really coming together to support each other and evacuate the elders and the most in need first. Alaskans are the type of people who always are willing to lend a hand to their neighbor. Mr. President, this flood really hit the community hard. Nearly every structure in Galena and the surrounding 25-mile-wide valley basin was underwater. And you get a more close-up view here of exactly how that water moves in and just floods out the whole area. And as the ice jam on the Yukon causing the flood isn't gone yet, village downstream, downriver from Galena, like St. Mary's and Holy Cross, remain on alert and are bracing for their possible evacuation. Again, reminding folks, you cannot drive out of these communities. You have to fly out or take the river. The people who live along the Yukon River respect it as a resource, but know that living along the banks can also bring dangerous conditions, which we must prepare for. Though the waters in Galena are subsiding, we know the real work just begins. This community must rebuild stronger, more prepared for future disasters, must do within the short summer construction season and added complications for Alaska. Again, our spring is here, the summer will be here, and within 3.5 months, winter will be back. As chairman of the Senate Homeland Security Subcommittee on Emergency Management, I take this flooding event very seriously. I've been in touch with local leaders, state disaster response agencies, and FEMA. I will remain engaged throughout the cleanup and rebuilding process. I'm working with the state on this emergency. We'll make sure that we have all the resources possible as Galena repairs and rebuilds. The emergency response priorities right now are restoring essential services and getting people back in their homes. I'm pleased that the Alaska Governor Parnell declared a state disaster for Galena last week, and I urge the President to act quickly to declare a federal disaster to free up vital federal resources to help our state and its people recover. Responding to natural disasters in Alaska is very different than the lower 48. We have very unique challenges. It's important to have perspective on the size and scope of Alaska. Alaska's land is 2.5 times the size of state of Texas. Our road system is smaller than that in Rhode Island. And 82% of Alaska communities are only accessible by air. Just flying from Galena to Fairbanks or back and forth is equivalent to flying from Washington, D.C. to New York. Actually, it's a little bit longer. It's an amazing distance when you have to go from place to place. And as I reminded folks, as you see the great Yukon, in order to bring supplies and necessities, it's an hour-long flight from the Fairbanks region. This makes traditional lower 48 disaster response unrealistic for Alaska. In most communities, we don't have the road system to truck in critical supplies. We frequently rely on skilled bush pilots and boat captains to bring relief to communities in need. Our pilots are often forced to land on gravel runways or river sandbars, and our barge captains must navigate dangerous waters to access rural villages. These experiences most residents of the lower 48 couldn't even begin to imagine. And this disaster in Galena is a stark reminder why we must continue to invest in the aviation and maritime lifelines that Alaskans rely on for survival. Another issue unique to my state is the absence of broadband access in rural areas. Now, when I say that, most people say, what's the big deal? Everyone is hooked up. Not in Alaska. Something most people would consider critical infrastructure in responding to disasters. Increased broadband deployment throughout rural Alaska would help affect communities like Galena by providing much vital information, such telehealth access to help the injured residents, up-to-date information on changing weather conditions, better communication between responders and the Disaster Response Center, information on incident response teams and cleanup on strategies. And I have to tell you, my personal example, when I called the individual who was in charge of the situation on the ground, we were waiting for another radio call in let me repeat that, a radio call in to get an update from someone who was on the site because the technology doesn't exist at the level that's necessary to monitor a disaster of this magnitude. This disaster is a reminder of the inequities that still exist in serving rural America. I will continue to work with my Senate colleagues to act and provide rural communities with the better broadband access, not only for emergency disasters that we're having here, but also for basic communication. All these factors mean Alaskans must work and respond differently when disasters occur in our state. As our state emergency response chief often tells me, you can't do big city response in most Alaska. FEMA rules don't always work for rural Alaska. One key question is making sure FEMA programs for individual assistance are fully employed and complement state assistance. I'm hopeful between the federal, state, local governments, tribal governments, we can get some much-needed assistance to the residents of Galena living through this nightmare. I know how strong the people of Galena are. We know they will continue to stick together through this trying time. We couldn't do it without the ongoing support of the National Guard and the Alaska Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management Office. We'll continue to work with them as we help the residents of Galena to get back on their feet. I'm looking forward, as chairman of the Emergency Management Subcommittee, I'll be holding listening sessions in Alaska to discuss the preparedness and mitigation solutions to natural disasters. Because it's not just the interior that faces serious threats for natural disasters, we must also consider North Slope communities who are often confronting changes from the warming Arctic. It's important for us to tackle these issues head-on, to create public-private partnerships, strong communication lines, and disaster response plans so our communities are protected and our residents are safe. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. And I note an absence of a quorum.
Mr. Alexander.
And the Senate today working on the Farm Bill. Also today, the death of Senator Frank Lautenberg, who died from viral pneumonia at the age of 89. He served 2 separate times in Congress, coming out of retirement in 2002 to take the seat of a colleague who was facing corruption charges. He was also the principal sponsor of the bill that banned smoking on domestic flights. President Obama issued a statement saying that Michelle and I were deeply saddened to learn of the passing of Senator Frank Lautenberg, a proud New Jerseyan who lived America's promise as a citizen and fought to keep that promise alive as a senator. And Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell releasing a statement pointing out that he was the Senate's last remaining World War II veteran. Frank was a patriot whose success in business and politics made him a great American success story and a standout even within the fabled greatest generation. We expect to hear from his colleague, Senator Menendez, 5 o'clock Eastern Time from the Senate floor. And New Jersey Governor Chris Christie will appoint a replacement until the next election. Again, Senator Lautenberg was 89 years old. The Senate started out the day with prayers for Senator Lautenberg, and here's a look at the opening on the Senate floor.
Let us pray. O God, thank you for being near to us in good and bad times. we celebrate your wonderful blessings that bring us new victories each day. As we look at the flowers on the desk of our friend and brother, Senator Frank Lautenberg, we thank you for his life and legacy. As we mourn his death, send your comfort into our hearts. Bless Bonnie and his family and give them your peace. Let our memory of this good and courageous American inspire us to transcend the barriers that divide us and to work for the good of America. We pray in your merciful name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., June 3, 2013. To the Senate. Under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Tim Kaine, a senator from the Commonwealth of Virginia, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Patrick J. Leahy, President Pro Tempore.
Majority Leader.
I ask the Senate to observe now a moment of silence in honor of Frank R. Lautenberg, late a senator from the state of New Jersey.
The Senate will now observe a moment of silence. If all could please stand.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
I have a few matters I must take care of. We'll be in a period of morning business until 4 p.m. today. Following that morning business, Senate will resume consideration of the Farm Bill. At 5:30, there will be 2 roll call votes on amendments to that bill. There are 2 bills just due for a second reading.
Clerk will read the titles of the bills for a second time.
H.R. 3, an act to approve the construction, operation, and maintenance of the Keystone XL pipeline and for other purposes. H.R. 271, an act to clarify that compliance with an emergency order under Section 202C of the Federal Power Act and so forth and for other purposes.
Mr. President, I object to both further proceedings with regard to both of these matters.
Objection having been heard, the measures will now be placed on the calendar.
Mr. President, when I learned early this morning that Frank Lautenberg had died, of course, I became immediately very, very sad. I've served with him for 2.5 decades or more here in the Senate, and to see now the flowers on his desk. It seems the flowers have barely wilted on the desk that was right behind me, center in away. So I, Mr. President, have a heavy heart. A senior senator from New Jersey and my friend, Frank Lautenberg, died this morning, as we all know. My thoughts are with his lovely old wife, Bonnie, his children, and 13 grandchildren. Few people in the history of this institution have contributed as much to our nation and to the United States Senate as Frank Lautenberg. His success story is really what the American dream is all about. He came from a family of working-class immigrants from Eastern Europe. Russia and Poland. His parents struggled, and I've heard Frank talk about how they struggled. They worked so hard. They moved around New Jersey often. When Frank was 18, during the middle of World War II, he enlisted in the United States Army. During World War II, he served in the Signal Corps, and I can remember Frank talking about his experiences in the European theater. Once as I said, he was on the Army Signal Corps. He's up on a power line, a wooden power pole, and he can see the war going on in his sight. During World War II, he talked about the many experiences he had, as he said, making him a better American. He was very proud of this military service. He is the last World War II veteran having served in the Senate. We don't have any World War II veterans anymore, Mr. President. His death is a great loss for this institution in many, many different ways. When Frank came home from the war, he was obviously very smart and was permitted to attend the very prestigious Columbia University. He did it, of course, on the GI Bill, like millions of other returning Americans did. But he quickly found his own business, his own company. He did it with two boyhood friends, all three of them from New Jersey, 3 kids from New Jersey. Under his leadership, this firm, Automatic Data Processing, known as ADP, grew into the largest computing service company of its kind in the world. He was so very, very proud of that company. And he never hesitated to tell everyone that he made money. He became rich. He was a poor boy who became wealthy as a result of people being able to fulfill their dreams as people can do in America. Frank wasn't content with his personal success alone. He was proud of a lot of the civic and charitable things he did, but nothing made him more proud of what he did outside government than when he served as the head of the United Jewish Appeal, known as the Jewish Federations of North America. He was very proud of that. Mr. President, Frank Lautenberg was known for many, many things before he came to the Senate, but he ran an impossible race for the Senate and was elected. In 1982, he came to the Congress the same year that I did. And in the 3 decades since, he's worked tirelessly on behalf of his state and the country. He retired once. He couldn't stand retirement. He hated retirement. He couldn't stay away from public service, and he returned to the Senate again in 2002. He had a remarkable career. I've just touched upon a few of the things. His determination that made him successful in the private sector also served him well in the United States Senate. Mr. President, motivated by his own experience, Senator Lautenberg, a World War II veteran, co-wrote the 21st Century GI Bill of Rights, recognizing he did how much this meant to him, and he wanted to help.
Dearest colleagues, Senator Frank Lautenberg of New Jersey passed away. Most of us saw Frank just a few weeks ago. He was here on the floor of the Senate. He had to come down. It was one of those moments where his vote was crucial. And we knew that he was struggling, but we also knew he'd be here. He said he would, and he was. He sat just right over here in a wheelchair with that trademark Frank Lautenberg smile. I don't think I've ever run into a person in my life as happy as Frank Lautenberg. He was a great joke teller. And the best thing about Frank's joke, even if he was telling it for the 254th time, he would start laughing before the end of the joke, and pretty soon the whole room was laughing. You always wanted to be out for dinner with Frank and Bonnie because you just knew it was going to be a good time. You'd hear a lot of jokes you'd heard before, but you encouraged him to tell them. He had so many stories to tell. Here he was, a member of the greatest generation, having served in World War II and served here in the United States Senate. 2 different approaches. He retired once and came back. served here to the age of 89. He astonished us all when he came here on the floor of the Senate that he was wheeled in a wheelchair to vote on some important amendments related to gun safety and gun control. Frank, if he were alive, would not have missed those votes. It meant so much to him. It was an issue that he led on, he was respected for. When it came to closing the loopholes where convicted felons and people who had no business owning guns were buying them anyway, Frank Lautenberg led the effort to stop the proliferation of guns and the distribution of them to people who would misuse them. It was a cause that he felt passionately about and one he cast many tough votes on as he served in the U.S. Senate. His return that day for those votes was an act of courage in a long life that was filled with courage, starting with his service in the United States Army in World War II and continuing throughout his life. Physical courage, political courage, and moral courage. When Frank Lautenberg spoke to some law students at Rutgers University about 10 years ago, he said he'd considered briefly studying law himself after he'd served in the Army in World War II, but decided he was 25 years old after World War II and too old to start law school. He told the law students it was too late. I'd missed my opportunity. Well, Frank Lautenberg may not have earned a law degree, but make no mistake, Frank Lautenberg of New Jersey left an important mark on the laws of America. Here's how I first came to know him. I was a congressman in 1986. I had been here 4 years. I was from Springfield, Illinois. I'd never met Frank Lautenberg of New Jersey, who was a senator at the time. And I got this crazy notion to introduce a bill to ban smoking on airplanes. And I didn't have a chance, not a chance. The entire leadership of the House of Representatives opposed me. All the Democratic leaders of my party and all the Republican leaders too. And yet, I put the amendment on an appropriation bill, a transportation appropriation bill, and through some good luck and breaks, it made it through the Rules Committee. That wasn't supposed to happen. It turns out that Claude Pepper of Florida, the chairman of the Rules Committee, when he was a senator years before, had been instrumental in starting the National Cancer Institute. As a Southerner, he didn't talk much about tobacco. Nobody did from the South in those days. But in his heart, he knew that tobacco smoking was killing people. He let me get that amendment to the floor, which shocked everybody. And I remember the day, this goes back quite a few years now, it's 27 years ago. I was in the House of Representatives, brand new, calling this amendment to ban smoking on flights of 2 hours or less. That's how we started. And I looked up in the gallery, and the gallery was filled with flight attendants in their uniforms from all the different airlines. They were victims, too, of secondhand smoke. Well, we called that measure for a vote, and it passed. It just shocked everybody. And it turned out that the House of Representatives was the biggest frequent flyer club in America. They were sick and tired of sitting on airplanes and breathing in somebody else's secondhand smoke. Well, there were a few moments of jubilation and celebration, and then somebody said, well, what are you going to do in the Senate? And I thought, oh my goodness, that is an important part of this. So I decided to call the chairman of the Transportation Appropriations Subcommittee, a fellow named Frank Lautenberg of New Jersey. I didn't know him, but I said to him, Frank, I'd like to ask you a favor. Would you consider offering this bill as an amendment to the Senate Transportation Appropriation Bill? He said, I'll get back to you. And he did, in a hurry. He said, I'm on board. Let's do it together. Well, it was the best phone call I ever made. And for the people of this country and those who fly in airplanes, that team of Lautenberg and Durbin managed to pass a bill signed into law which did much more than we ever dreamed of. We thought this little idea of taking smoking off airplanes would make flight a little more comfortable and safer. From a health point of view, what neither Frank nor I realized at the time was it was a tipping point. Americans looked around and said, if we're going to take smoking off airplanes, why stop there? Trains, buses, offices, hospitals, restaurants. Just look across the board what's happened in America. Neither Frank nor I saw this coming, but it worked. It's changed this country. It's changed the Senate, the House. It's changed this country. And I wouldn't be standing here today telling you the story were it not for Frank Lautenberg. He was just the very best partner I ever could have had. Well, the day came when I was elected to the Senate. He and I used to go around and tell the story from time to time, reminiscing about that battle back in 1986. Frank told us he was once a two-pack-a-day cigarette smoker himself. But when it came to this bill, he knew the right thing to do. And I was lucky to have him by my side. I couldn't have done it without him. He was the driving force behind a lot of other laws that were important to America, too. Setting the national drinking age at 21, setting a national blood level definition of .08 for drunk driving. Just these laws on smoking and drunk driving saved millions of lives thanks to the leadership of Frank Lautenberg. He was the last remaining World War II vet in the Senate. Just a few weeks ago, we lost Danny Inouye, who used to sit right here. He, of course, served in World War II as well. He passed away, Frank did, early this morning in New York. He's survived by his wife, Bonnie Engelhardt Lautenberg. What an extraordinarily good person she is. I left a message for her on her voicemail, said, you know, standing by Frank's side made a big difference in his life and in the years that they were together. They were a great, great partnership. In addition, he is survived by children, 6 children, 13 grandchildren. He was a leader on environmental protection, transportation, protecting public health. He authored the law that prevented domestic abusers from possessing guns. It wasn't an easy thing to do. It looks pretty obvious, doesn't it? Turned out police organizations were opposing him because policemen, some of them, had been accused of domestic abuse, and they couldn't carry a gun under the Lautenberg Amendment. Frank stood his ground. He co-wrote the new GI Bill for the 21st century. A man who was a beneficiary of the original GI Bill in World War II teamed up with Jim Webb, the state of Virginia. And the two of them put together a GI Bill that our men and women who served are richly deserving. He authored the Toxic Right to Know law. It was another great law that he and I co-sponsored. It came down to a question of the chemicals that are put in fabric in our furniture, which sadly are leached out and get into the environment of our homes, many times affecting small children. Frank was quick to be the leader on that issue, even though his state of New Jersey is one of a lot of chemical manufacturers and producers. He led in this effort to protect families and children. He wrote the law to create the Patterson-Great Falls National Historic Park. After he cast his 9,000th vote in December of 2011, Senator Harry Reid proclaimed on the Senate floor, Frank Lautenberg has been one of the most productive senators in the history of the country. Well, it was February 15th that Frank announced he wasn't going to seek another term in the Senate. At the time of his announcement in his hometown of Patterson, he set out an agenda for the remaining 2 years of what he wanted to get done before he left the Senate, reforming the U.S. chemical safety laws, improving gun safety, and providing federal resources from New Jersey to rebuild from Superstorm Sandy. We owe it to Frank and his memory to make sure those things are done. I know that Bob Menendez, his friend and close colleague from New Jersey, will pick up that gauntlet and proceed to carry on in Frank's name. He used to say with some pride that he was a success in business, and he was, and that he understood the mind of a businessman, but he never ever lost touch with the common man and the people who counted on him in New Jersey and around the United States. The United States Senate is going to miss Frank Lautenberg. I'm going to miss a great pal. I'm going to miss one of the best dinner companions you could ever dream of here in Washington, D.C. We're going to join together on Wednesday up in New York for a memorial service. I'm sure it's going to be widely attended because Frank did a lot of things for a lot of people over the course of his years of public service. I'm going to miss him. Mr. President, I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President.
Senator from Vermont.
President, I ask consent to call the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I'm going to speak on a different subject, but and I'll speak further about a dear colleague, Senator Lautenberg. And I look at the flowers on his desk, and seems the years I've been here, I've seen too many of my colleagues' flowers there. Of course, every day that Frank Lautenberg's been here, I've had the privilege of serving with him, a dear, dear friend. I missed him when he left the Senate, and it was overjoyed when he came back to the Senate. He was a man who cared about his country, cared about the Senate, cared about the people. Man who started from humble beginnings, became extremely wealthy, spent a lot of that time giving that wealth away, and always serving others. Whether it was our last combat veteran, actually last veteran from World War II, serving this body. Many of us have got to know him and spent time hearing of those horrendous times in Europe during World War II. We're better for it, but realized a person who had served the country more than any of the rest of us could have did during that time. So I'll speak further about my friend Frank Lautenberg. But I know Marcel and I extend our love to Bonnie and his children, his family. Mr. President, if I might consent to continue as though in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, before the Senate went into recess, I was disappointed with statements made to the Senate that misstated the history of Judge Srinivasan's confirmation process. The senator who said that the chairman of the Judiciary Committee made no effort, his words, to have a hearing on Judge Srinivasan until late last year was misinformed, and in so stating what he did, he misinformed the United States Senate. We made efforts in the fall before the election to schedule such a hearing, and renewed our push to have a hearing on his nomination before the end of the session. And I had been accommodating Republican objections by not scheduling a hearing before the end of last year. These erroneous record statements, these erroneous statements to the rest of the United States Senate have me wondering whether I should be so accommodating to Republican scheduling demands and requests that they then forget their demands, their efforts to avoid responsibility and blame others. In other words, they request a delay and then say, well, of course, it's somebody else's fault that we had the delay. Judge Srinivasan was nominated June 11, 2012. During a summer when Senate Republicans were in the process of constricting the confirmation process and intent on their misapplication of the so-called Thurman Rule to stall judicial nominees before the presidential election. It was only in May of this year that the Senate finally completed action. The 19 nominees held over from the Senate executive calendar. It was only in May 2012 the Senate finally completed action of the 19 nominees held over from the Senate executive calendar in 2011. Republicans were then in the process of filibustering a nominee to the Ninth Circuit from Arizona. Interestingly enough, the person they were filibustering had been recommended by John Kyle of Arizona, the deputy Republican leader, of course, a Republican senator. Republicans are dragging out confirmations of judicial nominees who had been nominated in the fall of 2011 and the early months of 2012. They even filibustered a 10th Circuit nominee from Oklahoma, who had been supported by the 2 Republican senators from Oklahoma in what was the first filibuster of a circuit court nominee reported with a bipartisan support by the Judiciary Committee. Throw out all the precedents, throw out all the rule books, throw out everything that Democrats and Republicans have done in the past. It's going to be our way or the highway. And even when the President of the United States, in trying to reach out, nominates a judge supported by the 2 Republican senators of that state, a judge reported out by a bipartisan vote by the Senate Judiciary Committee, is, oh, what the heck? President Obama nominated him. Let's filibuster. This is wrong. It is petty. It is beneath the United States Senate of America. They filibustered a First Circuit nominee from Maine, who was supported by the 2 Republican senators from Maine. In fact, Republicans had filibustered the earlier nomination of Caitlin Halligan to the D.C. Circuit. Anyone who needs to refresh their recollection of those months should reread my statements on judicial nominations from June 6, June 11, June 12, June 18, June 26, July 10, July 16, July 23, July 30, August 2nd, September 10, September 20th, November 30th, December 3rd, December 6th, December 11th, December 13th, and December 17th. Unlike the misstatements made to the United States Senate, that's where the facts are in those statements of mine. By July 19, 2012, I determined that the paperwork of the Srinivasan nomination was complete, and the nominee could be included in a hearing. It's been my practice as chairman of the Judiciary Committee, in an effort to be fair, to do something not always done by others, to give the minority notice and allow consultation before scheduling a nomination for a hearing. That time, the next July hearing had been discussed is one devoted to the nominee to head the Antitrust Division at the Department of Justice. A nomination itself had been delayed, into which there was Republican opposition. During the August recess, my staff asked Senator Grassley about holding the hearing on the Srinivasan nomination in September. They raised objections and concerns about proceeding with the D.C. Circuit at that time, but agreed to proceed with 4 district nominees and a Court of International Trade nominee. In November 2012, after the American people had solidly reelected President Obama, we raised the need for a hearing of the D.C. Circuit nomination again. Republicans objected, notwithstanding the precedent of holding a hearing for one of President Bush's D.C. Circuit nominees during a similar lame duck session. Instead, they said, no, 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 it's all right to do it to a Republican president, but not for this Democratic President Barack Obama. We can't do it for him. I know you allowed it for President George W. Bush, but after all, he's different. He was a Republican president. We can't do it for this Democratic president. Said they wanted to proceed on a district court nominee during the lame duck. And they insisted that the Srinivasan hearing be put off until the next Congress and the new year. So in deference to Republicans, we held off. They agreed to be included at the first nominations hearing in the 113th Congress. But then, in early January this year, when called upon to hold up what they had said they would agree to, their end of the bargain, oops, we want to change the rules again, they balked. They insisted that the nominee and others be interviewed. Scores of documents produced the efforts to stall other nominations. In other words, having made an agreement, they backed out of it. The nominee was not and could not have been the lawyer who handled the Magna case. In fact, the U.S. was not a party to the Magna case. But, you know, it was obvious in backing him up, or slowing him up, they were really trying to go after the president's nominee to be Labor Secretary. I mean, it got wheels within wheels. So after months of attempts to get committee Republicans to focus on nominee at hand, while they insisted on their wide-ranging, hand-wringing investigation of Tom Perez, a nominee not pending before the Judiciary Committee, they finally agreed to include Srinivasan at the Judiciary Committee on April 10, 2013, nearly a year later, 7 months after the hearing I first proposed. Now, as I noted in my December 12 hearing statement, as chairman, I had not jammed the minority with judicial confirmation hearings the way my Republican predecessor did. I was trying to bring the Senate back to the way it should be, the same way I did during the immigration hearing. I did not want to go back to the games playing that we had to face when they were in charge. I think no good deed goes unpunished. We held only 11 judicial confirmation hearings in 2012. In light of the Senate's recess schedule for the election cycle, we held only 2 after the August recess. The nominations included those hearings where those agreed to with a ranking minority member. I now see that when you try to work it out and we keep our word, and we have conciliation and accommodation and keep our word, not part of the bargain, all we get is recrimination from the other side as you try to break the bargain. That is not the Senate I've been proud to serve in for 38 years. Now, this nominee was praised at the hearing, proceeded to answer scores of written questions after the hearing. When he provided the response, I listed his nomination for action on May 9, 2013. And what has become standard practice for the Republicans on the Judiciary Committee, they still insist on holding over for another week for no good reason. I protected their right on that, even though it has been abused in a way I have never seen in 38 years. And then, now let's talk about this person they kept stalling and stalling and stalling. Is so controversial. Well, when it finally got to a vote in the committee, it was 18-0. There were only 18 members on the committee. When it got to the Senate, it was unanimous. This man has been made to dang